Hi guys, my name is Lisa Whitehouse and I'm the artist behind Whitehouse Art. Thank you for joining me today for one of my mini tutorials. Be sure to hit subscribe if you want to see other videos like this one. Let's get started. Alright, so for today we're going to be painting a butterfly. We're painting a monarch specifically. We're going to be painting a pink flower with the butterfly resting on top. And this is going to be similar to this painting that I've done before. So I'll walk you through how I do it step by step, what colors I use, and how to achieve this sort of whimsical, loose style for this butterfly. So first things first, I like to use an angled brush as well as a liner brush for this piece. You're going to want to have a variety of shades in the sort of orange, red, and yellow family. So I use quite a bright yellow, bright orange, as well as a fairly bright red. You sense a theme here. I'm choosing colors that are all fairly bright, as well as a sort of a medium toned but still fairly bright pink for the flower. And then I like to use a yellow ochre for the center of the flower, as well as a Payne's gray for the wings, the center of the flower, and a bit of black, lamp black, for the tips of the wings as well. So when I start out with a piece like this, I like to start out with the sections that are sort of reading left to right. So I'm going to start out with the flower, and that way I can do the wings next without messing up the flower. So I'll just put my stem here. I forgot the stem. So there we go. So first things first, I always start with clear water. That's with most of my paintings. You'll find that I'm always laying down the clear water first. And I'm laying down the clear water fairly thin and just on the side of the petal, just like this. And that way, when I take the pink, I'm going to take just the tip of the brush and lay it down on the side of the flower. And that way the paint will bleed in gradually, and it'll be lighter towards the right side and darker towards the left. So now that you get the idea, I'm going to work through all the petals. And that way I can do them all at once. So I'm careful to leave a little bit of a white line between each petal, and that way they don't all bleed together. It's okay if there's a little bleeding that happens, but we want to avoid having them be all together. We want to still have a bit of definition. So for this rightmost petal, I'm actually painting on the right side of it. So it should still be wet when you lay down your paint. If it's not, you might just have to work a little slower. So still staying on the right side, working all the way up to the top. You can see this one bled into this petal, and that's totally okay. You just want overall them to stay separate. It's okay if the odd one bleeds together. I'm using a little bit darker here so that we have a bit of variation. Just inserting a little bit here. And then because I can tell this is still wet, I'm going to thin out my brush, but just using the tip, I'm going to add a few strokes of paint here just to create a few lines that bleed. And we will go back and add a bit more detail, but sometimes as I'm working, I like to do that too. Kind of jumping around a little bit. So that's all I would do for the first coat on the petals. Let that dry. It's going to lighten a lot as it dries, so we'll have to come back to it, but that's totally okay. Now for the center, and that's what we're going to do next, we're going to want to put down a layer of water, being careful not to bleed into the petals themselves. So we're going to leave a thin white line of clear water with no clear water between the petals and the center. That way the pink doesn't bleed into the center. For the top, what I'm going to do is start with a yellow ochre. And you can use your bright yellow too. If you don't have more than one shade of yellow, that's totally okay. Use what you got. What specific colors we use isn't as important as the overall feel we get. So if you have a different color orange than me, that's totally okay. If you don't have any orange at all, feel free to use a red. Feel free to use just yellow and the Payne's gray. We're fairly flexible on what colors we use for this piece. So I'm moving around with the black now, or sorry, Payne's gray. Now this gray will lighten a lot as it dries. Not to worry, we're going to go back over it again, just over the gray again. And this is where I want to kind of just lightly feather into the petals a little. Just a little bit with the black. Payne's gray. I'm gonna mess up that a lot. I keep calling the Payne's Gray black. When we do use black in this piece, but just, I like the way the Payne's Gray has a softer feel. So I'm careful not to overuse the color black just because I find black very strong. And I want to keep this painting still fairly light. So now as this is drying, we're going to move on to the wings because the wings require 2 coats as well. So it's important to just sort of move strategically along the painting. So for the wings, we do the same as we did for the rest. We're going to fill in the wing. We'll start with this wing that's behind, and I'm being careful to leave a few little sections white. You can't see on the camera, but there's actually, if you look at it at a sideways glance, you'll see that I left a few little sections white, and I just like the way that looks. I find it just creates a little bit more interest, keeps the painting still feeling loose and airy. So we're just laying down some orange here, and then I'm going to lay down a little bit of the bright yellow right over here. Resist the urge to really blend it in. Let it take its time making its way over. So as you can see, I'm only moving this way. I'm not filling in with my brush the whole way. I'm letting the water do that. I'm going to take a tiny bit of pink and just put it here. And then to get those sort of shine marks, the way the wing is sort of, I don't know what you'd call it. They're almost like radiant glow from the wing. I just take a little bit of clear water and then I move it from farther away towards the wing, and then it's gonna push its way out. And that's all you have to do. It's gonna gradually pull out as it dries. So next we're gonna do the bigger wing. Now for this, we just go ahead and fill it all in again, being careful not to cover every little section. You can allow it to touch the other wing a little bit, but not completely. And I might leave a few more sections white on this than it will have in the end, because sometimes on the second layer I'll fill in more. So I'm going to add, I'm always feathering the paint this direction. So if I take the red, ooh, that red's quite strong. We're going to just lighten that up a bit by adding some clear water. That can happen sometimes where I get quite a bit on the brush and I don't want that, so I'm going to feather that out. And then we're going to go along the edge. It's very random what I do. I don't have necessarily a plan when I start out. Some people really like to plan their watercolors. That's totally okay. My style is more to just approach it with an open mind. Just start putting down the color wherever I feel it should go. And that's all I would do for a first coat. Very simple like that. And then I'm going to do some more of those little radiant beams of light, we'll call them, where I take the clear water, pull it in. Clear water, pull it in. That one didn't pull in, so we're just going to add a little more. And then one more, let's say here, where the red is. And that's all I'm doing for those. And just to ensure that they don't bleed all the way to the edge, sometimes I just lightly dab them so that it's more of a gradual bleed out. And that's all I would do for that coat. Now, because that often takes quite a while, you can now jump back to the petals, which should be fairly dry by now. I'm finding mine are mostly dry, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. So for the second coat, it's more just about adding some lines on them. So you're not wanting to make them a lot darker. You're just taking a little pink. You're not doing wet and wet. And you're just adding a little bit of darker over top. And I like to use the tip of my angled brush, but you're welcome to use a liner if you feel like that gives you more control. A liner brush like this one. This one here. Sometimes when you're starting out, it's nice to have a bit more control. So you can see now you're getting the background showing and the new pink layer is coming in a lot darker. And that's what we want. We just want it to feel like it's been layered. So that's all I'm wanting to do for the pink. Then I'm going to go back and take a little bit of Payne's Gray, and we're just going to go up to the top and darken this quite a bit. So you're using the tip and just kind of running it along the top so that it's a little bit darker near the top of the flower. And some are going to bleed down more than others, and that's okay. And then I'm wanting to add a little bit more here. And the way we do that is I'm just going to add some tiny little dots just along the bottom. And then in order for it not to feel so abrupt between the yellow and the black, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to, with just a tiny bit of yellow ochre on the small brush, I'm going to do a few dots here. And then I'm going to make sure my brush isn't too wet, and just sort of gently massage the Payne's gray into the yellow ochre. And if you find you're getting that really dark black coming up, you just take a dry brush and you dab some of that up. You don't want it to be too strong of black. We still want the center to be fairly light. So I'm going to soak a little bit of that up. And so I would call this flower complete. We're going to see how it looks when it dries. Sometimes we might need to do a few more lines with the black once it's fully dry. Black dries quite a bit lighter, so that's okay if you have to continue to layer it. Because I know that these wings aren't quite dry yet, what I'm going to do is do the stem. So all I do for the stem, oops, there's a little bit of red on my brush still. I just take the stem, move it down, a little bit of green. In this case I have a lime green here, but whatever you have in your palette's fine. And I'm just going to draw that little stem there. And that's all we're doing for that. So now I'm going to look at this at an angle and see if it has dried as we sat here. And it's mostly dry, but you know what? I'm going to give it a good 10 minutes. So we'll come back when it's fully dried and we can do the second layer. All right, so now that the wings have had a good amount of time to dry, we can go ahead and add that second coat. So it's the same thing as the first, except leaving a few more spaces white. So I'm covering it with clear water with a few white spaces here, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some more orange over top. I'm keeping the brush fairly dry so that we have some of those dry brush strokes that you see here. I like that texture that it gives. And I'm making it a little darker towards the base of the butterfly. We're going to keep it a little lighter towards the top. And then right when we get to the tip, we're going to use a little bit of that Payne's gray. Not everywhere, just a little bit. And let it bleed in. And we'll darken it as it's drying, but this is kind of the first pass at it. So we'll do a little bit right here. And then I want to add a little bit right at the base. So that's pretty much all I would do for that wing. We can kind of move on now to the next wing. All right, so for the next wing, it's the same thing. We repeat, filling in parts, not all, with clear water. And then we're going to go ahead and add some yellow. Brush is a little too dry in this case. I'm going to use some yellow here and then maybe a bit more orange towards the top. And then some yellow, some red right at the base, just like I did on the other wing. Pink here, and sometimes I'm letting some of these lines show through, so not all of them I want to bleed. I want to actually be able to see some lines. And then what we're going to do is go around the top and add a little bit of that black, not everywhere, but just in some places. And I really like to focus on the corners for the gray, keep them nice and strong. And allow that to sort of bleed as it dries. And then we're going to do the body of the butterfly so that it bleeds outwards. And we'll create a little more definition once it's dry, But for the body, we're just going to come in with the Payne's Gray, leaving a couple of little spots white. And I'm using my angled brush for almost everything, but even with this, if you feel more comfortable, you can use your small liner brush to do the legs. Because it dries lighter the whole time, I'm often adding it. So I'm noticing here it's drying quite a bit lighter. So I'm going to go back in and darken it a bit, add a few more lines, and just keep adding some Payne's Gray to the top corner. And I'm actually going to bounce around a little bit. So as this is drying now, I'm going to go back in and add a few more dots just towards right at the base of the flower, just to make sure we're creating that nice definition. And just with the pure Payne's Gray, quite thick in this case, I'm adding a few lines going down these flower petals. And this one I'm going to pull all the way down. Same with this one. There's not a heck of a lot of rhyme or reason to where I bring it down. It's just sort of where I see needing a bit more definition. I'm going to take a little bit of red and just dab it along the top. If I go too fast, just feel free to pause the video, catch up, and keep going. So this is a good time to add some splatters because lots of this is still wet and those splatters will blend in nicely. Some of them won't, some of them will, and that can be a nice look. So I'm taking some yellow and I'm going to splatter some of them outwards like that. And I'm going to take some pink and do the same thing. I like when some of the clear water droplets hit the wing so that the wing actually bleeds outwards. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and put it right here. And so if you take clear water and put that over top, some of these then bleed so that there's a bit more difference in each of them. They look a little less uniform. I'm going to dab up some of the clear water ones because we don't need so much clear water on the page. So as this dries, the black, like I said, the black or the Payne's Gray is going to lighten again. So we can just take a brush and as it's drying, we can just add a little more down. So that's all we're doing for this coat. We're going to let this dry yet again, and then that way the final coat will just be adding a tiny bit of detail. I like to sometimes use a little bit of white gouache at the end. So we'll let this dry, and then I'll show you what I do for some detail work right at the end. All right, so now that the painting's had a few minutes to dry, we can just add some more little final details. Just a few little swipes of red. And some of the gray again. And then I like to darken some of the edges a bit. And a bit more down here. It's still a little wet here, which is fine. I'm gonna add a couple orange ones, just maybe even thicker. Then I'm going to take my white pen. I use the Jelly Roll 10 size. And I'm going to add a few lines here on the flowers. A few dots here. And then just a few on the body. You can use a brush and white gouache as well. I find sometimes the pen's just a little easier to use. And then I'm going to add a few on the wings here. Not too many. And then what I'm going to do is I have something called poster paint. And it looks like this, and there's different brands of poster paint, so you certainly don't need to get the same one. But what I like to do is take a wet, clean brush, like the one you see here. I'll just show you as an example, this brush. And I dip it into the poster paint. And then I'll add a few splatters. I think that just adds a fun element to the piece. Now, this is still wet here, so they're bleeding quite a bit. I could wait and do it when it's dry. It's totally personal preference as to how many splatters you want. I find that is a good amount right there, so I think I'll leave it at that. And then what I'm going to do as a final touch is I will sign it. I like to sign most of my paintings in red, so we'll do that. And then once this painting is 100% dry, even the next day, what I'll do is I'll come back with a nice white eraser and dry off some of those pencil marks that you see on the painting. I find if you wait a full day for it to dry, you can actually dry through the watercolor. So if you see some lines through your watercolor and you erase them, it'll actually come right up because the watercolor is soaked into the page, whereas the pencil just sits right on top. So that's it for my little Monarch butterfly. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me, and I hope to see you on the next one. If there's anything you want to paint, just let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you guys had fun. Be sure to check out my other videos for more inspiration, and leave a comment below with some ideas that you want to paint. Thank you, and see you next video.